For years, blower style graphics cards have been known to run about as hot as the sun, maybe even a bit hotter, and if you had one at any point in time, I can guarantee you were saving a lot on that monthly heating bill. Now if we pair the Neutron Star, which is a blower style heatsink, with a GPU that is notorious for high temperatures, if my maths is correct, I think, now don't take my word for this, I think we get a nuclear bomb. This right here is the nuclear bomb in question. This is an RTX 3080 I bought secondhand for just €250. It was the absolute cheapest one I could find out here in Ireland, at least the cheapest working one, and I do think it was a pretty great deal all in all on the surface. The average 3080 here looks to be selling for a tad bit over 300 quid, although most sellers are listing them in the €400 range because they think they're made of solid gold and not willing to budge much on the price, and as a result they end up not selling at all. So obviously when I found this one cheap as chips, I had to swoop in like Batman and make that purchase as fast as I physically could. The catch obviously being the fact that it doubles as a personal mini oven. Either way though, I knew that I had just bought a 3080 for 3070 money, so it should provide 3080 performance, which should be pretty nice. The question now though is, how hot does it get, and should I keep a fire extinguisher on hand? Well, unfortunately after a bit of looking around, I couldn't exactly find a fire extinguisher, so whatever happens, happens. Now, truth be told, I couldn't find any videos online that go into much depth on this specific 3080, at least not in English, so I wanted to see for myself, what kind of performance can I get out of its stock? Like I said, 3080s are already known for running quite hot, and they also need more power than a submarine, which is obviously a big cause for the notorious thermals. That's why something very common with these cards is undervolting. But before any of that, let's quickly talk just a bit more about this very card. This is a 10GB GDDR6 variant, the most popular variant of the RTX 3080. 8704 CUDA cores, and a 320-bit memory bus, which was pretty incredible at the time. Looks wise, no, it's not your typical decked out with RGB 3080, but I think it's tasteful. Like, damn, it's a good looking card. Possibly my favorite of all cards I've ever owned. The single fan design just makes it look serious. I've always had a liking for these blower style cards aesthetically, especially when there's a backplate to go with it, but to me this one's on another level. It also weighs about as much as a baby elephant, so getting this thing inside my computer was no easy task. With it installed, I booted up F125 as my benchmark. Now, why F125? That's because it's one of the only games I actually play, and also because of its path tracing settings. Now, what is path tracing, you ask? You can think of it as ray tracing on steroids, making games look almost photorealistic, but at the cost of FPS. All of them. I think I recently saw a guy playing games on a printer, so I'll be expecting similar performance to that with path tracing on. Anyway, the main thing I wanted to test firstly with the stock clock speeds and voltage is, how is the temperature? How hot does this oven get under load? Will it thermal throttle? And does it really feel like my very own personal campfire under my desk? And the answer to all those is a very big yes. So to find out just how bad, I booted up F125 and got to work. Yeah, so I lied. I know I just beefed up all that path tracing, but it was getting hard to look at the 20 FPS benchmarks, and I didn't want to use AI upscaling because I didn't really want to take any load off the GPU either. So instead, I ran all tests at the beautiful street circuit of Singapore at ultra high settings, so essentially everything cranked, including ray tracing, just without path tracing on in 1080p. The 3080 was paired with a Ryzen 5 3600. I know, not the strongest gaming CPU out there, and I've upgraded now, but it'll do for a GPU-bound test. And 32GB of 3600MHz DDR4. So in the first test, I only just started, and brother, look at those temperatures. Within seconds, we were already hitting 89 degrees Celsius, and by turn 2 and 3, we were at 90. So you'd imagine the thermal throttling was pretty obvious. Just look at the clock speed. I think the stock boost clock is something like 1800 MHz, and here we're consistently running in the 1500 to 1600 MHz range. So pretty substantial performance loss. The average FPS over a lap was 78 FPS, a minimum of 57, and a maximum of 111. The first thing I noticed was that this thing wasn't getting very loud at all, especially at those temperatures. I was at minimum expecting OG PS4 noise levels, but it just wasn't, meaning the fan curve for this furnace was ridiculously lenient. Clearly something isn't right when the second you hop into a game, your GPU has the temperature to boil you a cup of tea. So for the next test, I applied a very safe undervolt, bringing the core clock down by 300 MHz and bringing the boost clock up to 1830 MHz at 0.85 volts. Also, I boosted the memory clock by 800 MHz. No messing with the fan curve just yet. So I ran the benchmark yet again, and while it wasn't as bad as stock, it wasn't much of an improvement either. We still hit 90 degrees at peak, and some thermal throttling was still very much apparent, just not as bad as before. I think what helped with the thermal throttling most was the fact that I brought up the max temperature in Afterburner to the max, and that's why we see a noticeable improvement in FPS to get an average of 85 FPS. Somehow we also got a maximum of 282 and a pretty crappy minimum of 33 FPS. Now, obviously, a 90 degrees sustained temperature is not exactly ideal, so more needs to be done here to reduce the need for having the fire department on standby at all times. So I applied the same undervolt setting, only this time the boost was at 0.825 volts and made a really crappy fan curve to actually cool the card rather than just make useless noise. Long story short, slightly more noise, slightly lower temps by about 5 degrees, peaking at 85 degrees Celsius, and very similar performance with an average of 87 FPS, a maximum of 117 FPS, but with a very solid minimum of 59. But 85 degrees is still way too hot. Another tweak of the fan curve gave me a maximum temperature of 82 degrees Celsius. Again, not good enough. I never thought I'd have to do this, but the blower 3080 forced my hand. Unfortunately, I had to bring out the freakishly extreme fan curve. That, paired with a slightly more aggressive undervolt, something like 1860 MHz boost at 0.818 volts, gave pretty much the same performance, but with relatively decent temperatures. It peaked at 78 degrees throughout the lap. Considering these are very short benchmarks, I think it would be safe to assume that during longer playtimes the temps would peak slightly higher, probably something like 81 to 83 degrees I would imagine, which is really not that bad, especially when you look at the sustained temperatures of some of these laptop GPUs. Easily in the mid to high 80s with more noise and half the performance, so really not that bad. But why not try the unthinkable, right? Why not push the boundaries and go where no one's gone before? So next, I did something so incredible, I'm not sure you could even begin to comprehend the slightest concept of it. I'm not even sure I can. I moved the power slider down a bit. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, with this breakthrough in cooling science, I have managed to make this 3080 run with somewhat decent temperatures. Looking at this benchmark, no, it's not running at 1800 MHz, it's got a power limit, so it won't do that. Instead, it stays in around 1750 MHz, I'd say on average, with less power draw, and as a result, just look at those temperatures. In this run, it peaked at 74 degrees, and that's about what you can expect from most 3080s, give or take. We got an average of 84 FPS, which is just slightly worse than the other tests, but it's unnoticeable in gameplay. But maximum and minimums stay pretty much the same, I think maybe a slightly lower max FPS. So I chucked on path tracing for shits and giggles, and lo and behold, the frame rate is a fraction of what it was before. But again, looking at the temperatures, the same thing, extremely manageable. I'm not sure there's much out there that stresses a GPU more than path tracing, and so I'm happy with what I'm seeing here. So bottom line, is it louder? Yes, by some margin, thanks to the incredible fan curve that I hooked it up with, but not that loud either. Think of it almost like a less annoying laptop fan sound. Gets fairly loud, but without it being as high-pitched and making you want to put your head through the nearest wall. It's definitely bearable. Is it hot? At stock, a fire extinguisher might not be enough. But with a bit of tinkering like you just saw me do, very acceptable temperatures are definitely possible. It just depends on how aggressive of an undervolt you can get, and if you want to accompany that with a power limit. So the way I see it, for €250, it's definitely a win. Considering even with the power limit, it definitely still beats out any 3070 Ti, and it has 2GB of VRAM over the 3070 Ti's 8GB, making it much more suitable for modern gaming at 1440p. So if you don't mind the noise, it's actually a pretty stellar deal. And to be honest, if I didn't already have another 3080, I would probably have kept this one in my main system. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, be sure to like, subscribe, and potentially even drop a comment down below. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great night, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.